A strange man dropped my wife off at home after the company party. I saw it on the garage cameras. He held her arm as she tried to balance herself on her high heels, laughing with an intimacy that hit me like a punch in the gut. She staggered into the house, her lipstick smudged, her hair disheveled. But it was when she entered the room and took off her coat that I saw it. Kiss marks on the neck. Several. Red. Recent. My heart raced, my vision blurred. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but I knew something was very wrong. My chest burned in a way I had never felt before. "What happened to you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice controlled. She blinked slowly, as if trying to process the question, and then smiled, that practiced smile I knew well. "What?" "Ah, love, nothing, it was just the party. We drank a little." "And those marks on your neck?" For a second, a flash of panic passed through her eyes, but soon she regained control. He touched his neck as if he was just noticing and laughed, a forced, dry laugh. "Oh. That?" It was a joke on the part of the staff. Someone pulled my arm and it must have left a mark. I stood there, still, analyzing her every gesture. The way he avoided my gaze. How the smile remained, but the body trembled slightly. I had known that woman for years. I knew when she was lying. The smell of alcohol mixed with cheap men's perfume permeated the room. I didn't respond. I just turned my back and went to the bathroom. I closed the door, looked at myself in the mirror and felt my blood boiling. What the hell was going on? My stomach turned. It wasn't possible. Not her. The night dragged on. She fell asleep almost immediately, or pretended to, while I lay beside her, thoughts consuming me. Who was that man? Why did he bring her home? And the brands? I needed to know the truth. The next morning, while she was taking a shower, I took her cell phone. My hands were sweating. My heart was beating so hard that it echoed in my ears. I knew the password. I unlocked it. I went straight to the messages. And there it was. The name of an unknown number, several messages deleted, but one was still there. Yesterday was amazing. I can still taste it. I felt my body freeze. Betrayal running like poison through my veins. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break that damn phone. I wanted to pull her out of the shower and demand that she tell me the truth. But no. Not like that. Not like that. I left the room. I grabbed the car keys and drove aimlessly, trying to absorb it. She was cheating on me. And the worst? She didn't even bother to hide it. The whole day was a blur. I could barely concentrate on anything. That night, she acted normally. He hugged me, kissed me, talked about work as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't been in another man's arms. And that made me sick. Disgusting her. Disgusted with me for being fooled so easily. But I wasn't going to leave it cheap. I needed proof. And that's when I decided to follow her. For the next week, I watched her every step. I installed an app to track my cell phone. I looked through his social networks, his work schedules, the places he frequented. Until I saw it. I saw when she left the office and didn't go straight home. I saw her enter a discreet restaurant, at a table in the back, and the man arrived minutes later. The same man who brought her home that night. They were holding hands. She laughed. I touched his face. The same face I wanted to crush with my own hands. The pain was unbearable. But I couldn't act in the heat of the moment. I needed to expose everything. And that's when I had the idea. A party. A celebration. An unforgettable event. She didn't know what was coming. She thought she was in control. But the truth always finds a way out. And when he left, she would regret every choice she made. Welcome to the channel where the truth about cheating is exposed bluntly. Here, we do not support and never romanticize infidelity. The stories are fictional, but the pain, consequences and destruction caused by betrayal are real. Our goal is to show how every choice has a price, and how lying can ruin lives. Get ready for a shocking, intense story full of twists and turns. Listen carefully, because in the end, the truth always takes its toll. Ethan and Laura's marriage has always been a reflection of the stability and complicity that so many people wanted to achieve. They met when they were young, when life seemed simpler and dreams were easy to draw. He, a dedicated man, meticulous at work and committed to his family, found the perfect balance in her. Laura was charming, sweet and vibrant in spirit, a woman who knew how to light up any room with just her presence. Together, they built a life based on respect, love and a comfortable routine, where the days passed between conversations about the future, cozy dinners and a silent intimacy that only those who have shared years together can understand. The apartment in which they lived was a reflection of their union, carefully decorated with pieces hand-picked by Laura, always so detailed and sensitive to the environment that surrounded them. The living room, with walls in neutral tones and elegant furniture, housed photographs spread across the shelves, portraits that captured moments of genuine happiness, unforgettable trips, birthdays, small everyday celebrations. Ethan liked to sit there at night, looking at the photos, remembering the early years of their marriage, when everything seemed new and vibrant, when there were no questions or shadows hanging over them. Their routine was stable, predictable in a comfortable way. Ethan left early for work, a trusted position at an engineering company, while Laura managed the marketing area of a multinational. She was always an independent, determined and talented woman, someone who captivated those around her with ease. However, in the last few weeks, something about her seemed different. Small changes imperceptible to someone unaware, but to Ethan, who knew every nuance of his wife, they were clear signs that something had changed. The way she took more time in the mirror before leaving for work, the messages that arrived late at night and were answered with a discreet smile and, above all, the way she seemed distant, even when they were together. He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself he was imagining things. Their marriage had always been solid, there had never been any reason to be suspicious, and Laura had never given any indication that anything might be wrong. But the restlessness persisted, a subtle discomfort that grew with each new detail that went unnoticed by others, but for him it was like an insistent echo in the mind. Laura's company party was approaching and, as usual, she insisted on Ethan accompanying her. In previous years, he was always by her side, but this time, due to an unpostponable work trip, he had to refuse. Laura didn't show much disappointment, she just smiled and said that she would understand, that she would enjoy it with her colleagues and that there was no problem. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest when he saw her so calm, but he pushed the thought away, convincing himself that it was just his mind playing tricks. On the night of the party, he sent a message to Laura before bed, wishing her to have fun and asking her to call when she got home. No response. Maybe she was busy, maybe the music was too loud to hear her cell phone. He tried to ignore it and ended up falling asleep, only to wake up a few hours later to a noise coming from the door. He got up slowly and went to the living room, where he saw, through the crack in the curtain, a car parked in front of the building. A tall, broad-shouldered man got out of the vehicle and walked to the door of the building. Laura came out soon after, laughing at something he had said, holding his arm to keep her balance. Ethan felt his blood run cold. He watched as his wife said goodbye to the man, who briefly touched her face before turning and returning to the car. Ethan's heart was pounding against his chest. He couldn't process exactly what he was feeling. Anger? Fear? Uncertainty? Laura entered the apartment without noticing his presence and went straight to the bedroom. He remained still in the room for a few seconds, trying to organize his thoughts. Then, he walked to the hallway and leaned against the bedroom door, listening to the sound of the shower turning on. Ethan's head was spinning. He didn't want to be that kind of man who suspects without proof, who creates unfounded paranoia. But something inside him screamed that nothing about the scene he had just witnessed was normal. Laura had never arrived from a party like that before. She had never been left by another man in the middle of the night, with marks on her neck that definitely weren't there before. Doubt set in like a slow poison. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Laura acted as usual, making coffee, talking about trivial matters, as if nothing had happened. Ethan watched her closely, looking for any sign of hesitation, anything that indicated something was wrong. But she was good at what she did. Very good. He would need more than a hunch. In the days that followed, Ethan began to notice details he had previously ignored. Laura received calls that she answered away from him. I quickly changed tabs when I was on the computer. She spent more time on her cell phone, exchanging quick messages that made her smile in a different way. It was subtle, but enough to make him feel a growing discomfort. And then, there was the second time. Another appointment, another night she went out without him. Ethan didn't sleep. He lay awake, waiting, his chest tight with uncertainty. When he heard the key click in the lock, his heart quickened. This time, he didn't hide. He remained in the hallway, watching as Laura entered. Her dress was slightly disheveled, her hair a little messier than it should have been. The scent was stronger, mixed with something he didn't recognize. Laura smiled when she saw him awake and approached to kiss him. He walked away. She frowned, confused, but didn't insist. Ethan didn't say anything. Just watched. He knew he needed to find out the truth. And he was willing to go all the way to achieve this. Ethan felt the weight of doubt crushing his shoulders with each new day. Laura's gaze, once a refuge of comfort and complicity, now seemed to hide secrets that he couldn't decipher. The changes in her behavior were subtle, but they were there, growing like invisible cracks in glass ready to shatter. Small delays at work, messages that arrived late at night and were answered quickly, muffled laughter on the phone that ended in a furtive glance when he entered the room. Ethan tried to convince himself that it was paranoia, that his mind was creating baseless scenarios, but the feeling that he was being deceived was eating him up from the inside out. He decided to act cautiously. He knew that if he accused Laura without concrete evidence, she would deny everything and make him look like the villain of the story. Then he observed. He wrote down patterns, times, calls. Each detail was a new thread pulled from a fabric that would soon come undone. He installed an app to track the location of her cell phone, something he never imagined he would need to do, but the need to know the truth spoke louder than any feeling of guilt. The first confirmation came on a Friday. Laura had said she would stay late at the office because of an important project. But the tracker showed a different address. A discreet hotel, away from prying eyes. Ethan felt his heart pounding in his chest, a mix of anger and disbelief. He stood still, looking at his cell phone screen, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she was there for another reason. But deep down, he already knew. He left the house without thinking twice. He drove to the place, parking a few meters away from the entrance. The hotel was modest, too discreet to be just a coincidence. Ethan's gaze scanned the parking lot, searching for any clue, any movement that would confirm his suspicions. That's when he saw it. Laura getting out of the elevator, fixing her hair, her lips still wet, her cheeks flushed. Beside her, a man. The same one from the other night, the one who had left her at home. They laughed, accomplices, as if sharing a secret that only the two of them understood. Ethan felt heat rise through his body, something between despair and anger. His chest rose and fell in quick, short breaths as his fingers closed around the steering wheel. He could get out of the car right then, confront them right there, end it all at once. But no. Not like that. If Laura was capable of deceiving him, of living this lie under the same roof as him, then he would do the same. I would pretend that I knew nothing, that I hadn't seen anything, and I would wait for the right moment to act. Over the next few days, Ethan was consumed by the silent pain of betrayal. Sleeping next to Laura, smelling her perfume, hearing her voice and knowing that it was all a fake made something inside him shatter. Her touch, once so familiar and warm, now felt dirty, contaminated by hands that weren't hers. But he endured it. He swallowed every word, every look, every fake smile she gave him because he needed the game to continue until he was ready to take her down once and for all. Laura continued to act as if nothing had changed. I went to work, exchanged messages, maintained my usual sweet and carefree tone. If there was any guilt, she knew how to hide it very well. But Ethan no longer saw his wife the same way. Now, her every movement was a reminder of what he had witnessed. Then, an idea emerged. Ethan decided that if Laura wanted to live this lie, he would help her believe it until the last moment. He started acting like the perfect husband. Small gestures of affection, thoughtful words, unexpected surprises. Laura seemed slightly suspicious at first, but soon accepted the change without question. She laughed more, talked about how they were in a good phase, how good it was to be connecting again. Ethan pretended to agree, pretended to believe, pretended to be happy. But at the same time, he was planning his next move. Laura had no idea what was coming. Her company's annual party was approaching. A formal event, full of speeches and celebrations. Ethan knew it would be the perfect setting for what he had in mind. He prepared himself down to the smallest detail, every movement calculated, every word chosen carefully. On the night of the event, he watched Laura get ready with an attention he wasn't used to giving. She looked beautiful, as always, but now there was something different. A sparkle in his eyes that he knew wasn't because of him. As she applied her lipstick in front of the mirror, he approached her from behind and slid his hands around her waist, feeling her shiver beneath his touch. "You look incredible," he whispered, watching her reaction. Laura smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, my love." Ethan knew that this was the last time he would hear that love coming from her lips without the bitter taste of irony. When they arrived at the event, he maintained his poise, greeting colleagues, smiling at the right moments, appearing genuinely involved in the occasion. Laura also played her role well, laughing, talking, casting discreet glances around the room, as if she were looking for something. And then, he appeared. The man. The lover. Ethan saw when their eyes met, when Laura quickly turned away, trying to hide it, when her hands tightened around the champagne glass. Her body spoke for itself. He knew she wouldn't resist. Throughout the night, Ethan remained attentive, observing without seeming intrusive. He noticed when Laura asked for permission to go to the bathroom, when the man did the same minutes later. He moved away from the crowd and followed them discreetly. He found a corridor further away, where few people passed by. And there they were. Laura and her lover, leaning against the wall, their faces too close, their smiles complicit. He held her arm, leaning down to whisper something in her ear. She laughed, throwing her head back in a way Ethan recognized all too well. His blood ran cold. His chest burned, a suffocating pain that seemed to tear him apart from the inside. He felt the urge to move forward, to pull her away, to do something to stop it from continuing. But he didn't move. He stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching as his wife belonged to another man. And then, it happened. The kiss. Her lips on his. The intimate, forbidden touch that sealed everything Ethan already knew, but that until that moment he didn't want to believe. The bitter taste of betrayal exploded in his mouth. He took a deep breath. Because now he was sure what he would do next. Ethan could feel the weight of truth pulsing through his veins as he drove home that night. The bitter taste of betrayal permeated his mouth, a slow poison that ate away every bit of the man who had once believed in his wife's loyalty. Every detail of that night was etched in his mind, from the way Laura looked at her lover to the intimate touch they shared in the hallway. The kiss. The muffled laughter. The shared secret that didn't include Ethan. But he was not a man who simply accepted being made a fool of. He was not someone who would let history be written without its final version. When he arrived home, he found Laura already there, acting as if nothing had happened. She was in the bedroom, facing the mirror, calmly removing her earrings. When he entered the room, she gave him a quick look, an automatic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan stood still, watching her as if he were seeing her for the first time. As if the woman before him was a stranger. Laura noticed the look and frowned, placing her hand on her hip, slightly uncomfortable. What it was? She asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but there was a stiffness in her voice. Ethan crossed his arms, feeling the weight of the silence between them becoming unbearable. He could confront her there, lay everything on the table at once. But no. Not yet. Nothing, I'm just tired, he replied, keeping his tone neutral, observing her every reaction. Laura hesitated for a second before nodding, returning her focus to her reflection in the mirror. He knew she thought she was safe, that her secret was protected, hidden beneath layers of tightly woven lies. But that was about to change. Over the next few days, Ethan stepped up his game. He remained closer, more attentive, watching her every move like a silent predator. Laura continued with her routine, without suspecting that every step she took was being monitored, that every smile she made on her cell phone was being noted in the mind of a man who was no longer the same. Then came the final blow. The night of the big reveal. Ethan had spent all day planning every detail. When Laura arrived home from work, he greeted her with a surprise. A special night, just for the two of them. Expensive wine, a candlelit dinner, the atmosphere charged with an air of reconciliation. Laura, not knowing what was coming, smiled delightedly. How beautiful, love. What are we celebrating? Ethan raised his glass, an enigmatic smile on his lips. Us. Our wedding. She picked up her glass, her eyes shining for a moment, before quickly looking away. Ethan noticed. It's good to see you like this. I thought you'd been distant lately, he said, swirling the wine in his glass, keeping his voice soft but sharp as a blade. Laura laughed, a nervous laugh. Just the stress of work. You know how it's been. Ethan nodded, bringing the glass to his lips, keeping his eyes fixed on her. Yes. I imagine so. Dinner continued with superficial conversations, exchanges of smiles, but Ethan could see the uneasiness growing within her. Laura's breathing was slightly irregular, as if she expected something to get out of control at any moment. He knew it was time. He stood up calmly, took his cell phone from his pocket and placed it on the table. There's something I need to show you. Laura blinked, confused. What is that? Ethan unlocked the screen and turned the phone toward her. On the display, a video started playing. The hotel hallway. She. The lover. The kiss. Laura turned pale within seconds. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Her hands shook as she stared at the video as if it were a death sentence. What is this? Her voice was low, trembling. Ethan leaned across the table, his eyes fixed on hers, filled with something that wasn't there before, contempt. You tell me, Laura. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The panic on his face was evident. The woman who always had answers for everything was now mute, crushed by the weight of the truth. Ethan. I can explain. He laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. Explain what? The video? The messages? The nights you said you were working? Laura put her hands to her face, her breathing hitching. It was a mistake. I didn't want it to be like this. Ethan threw the wine glass against the wall, the glass exploding into 1,000 pieces. Didn't you want it to be like this? You lied. You betrayed me under my nose. And you still want me to believe it was a mistake? She was crying now, her face pale, her lips trembling. I love you, Ethan, please. He walked away, crossing his arms, looking at her as if he had never seen that woman before. No. You loved the lie. He loved the thrill of deception. But what you never thought was that this story wouldn't end the way you wanted. Laura looked at him, her eyes full of despair, silently begging for a way out. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling something inside him finally break. He had waited for this moment, planned every detail. But what came next, Laura could never have predicted. Because betrayal was just the beginning. The real shock was yet to come. Laura couldn't breathe properly. The air felt thin around him, every second a crushing blow to his consciousness. The cell phone on the table was still glowing, the video paused at the exact moment of the kiss, an undeniable proof of his betrayal. But it wasn't just the video that scared her. It was Ethan. The man who had always been patient, understanding, who had always loved her unconditionally, was now there, in front of her, looking at her as if she were a stranger. His gaze no longer carried pain, only something much worse, a coldness that made her feel small, irrelevant, disposable. Ethan, please, his voice was hoarse, weak. He didn't respond right away. He walked slowly across the room, picking up a glass of water and taking a sip, as if he was deliberately giving himself time to drown in his own despair. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, without any rush. I waited to see how far you would go with this, he said, turning to face her. I wanted to know if, at some point, you would have the decency to tell me. If only once, during all these days, you would look at me and realize that I was destroying myself. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. Ethan let out a short, ironic laugh, throwing his head back as if he were faced with the most absurd thing in the world. Were you going to tell? When? When I was broken enough to beg for answers? Or when he decided it was time to move on and left you alone? She shook her head desperately. It wasn't like that. He threw the glass into the sink with force, the sound of the glass clashing echoing through the kitchen. It was not like that. His voice finally broke the coldness, brimming with anger. Then explain to me, Laura. Explain to me how you managed to lie next to me every night pretending you loved me while in the arms of another man. She flinched, tears now falling uncontrollably. I was wrong. I was wrong, Ethan, and I know it. I never wanted to hurt you. He closed his eyes for a second, taking deep breaths, trying to compose himself. But there was nothing that could make him feel whole again. Not after that. If you didn't want to hurt me, then why did you do it? The silence weighed between the two. The question hung in the air, but Laura didn't have an answer. Or maybe she had, but she knew he would never agree to listen to her. Because the truth was, on some level, she hadn't thought about the consequences. He had given himself over to the emotion of the moment, the danger of it, without considering the damage he would leave behind. Ethan ran his hands over his face, exhausted, feeling his patience coming to an end. It's over, Laura. Her eyes widened, panic evident. Ethan, no. We can overcome this. He laughed again, a laugh without any joy. Overcome? Do you think there is any universe where I can look at you and not remember what you did? Where can I touch you without feeling repulsed? I love you. No, you don't love me. His voice exploded, echoing through the room. He took a step forward, leaning over the table, his eyes fixed on her. If you loved me, this would never have happened. True love doesn't betray, doesn't lie, doesn't destroy the trust of someone who has always been by your side. Laura covered her face with her hands, sobbing, but Ethan was unmoved. No more. I'm leaving this house tomorrow, he continued, his voice returning to its firm, controlled tone. I'll take care of the divorce, and you can continue with the life you chose for yourself. She raised her head, desperate. Ethan, please don't do this. He just shook his head, eyes as cold as ice. You already did this for both of us. Laura collapsed onto the table, her shoulders shaking, as Ethan walked away. But he wasn't finished. There was still a piece missing from the puzzle, something she couldn't have predicted. And that's when he took an envelope from his jacket pocket and threw it on the table. She blinked, confused, before picking up the paper with trembling fingers. When he opened it, a lump formed in his throat. It was an invitation. An invitation to a party. But not just any party. It was Ethan's divorce party. His name was there, printed, in elegant letters, next to a humiliating text that detailed the reason for the event. Because some people deserve to be exposed. Laura looked at Ethan, horrified, but he just smiled, cool and satisfied. I hope you liked the surprise. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Because now she understood. Ethan wasn't just going to leave her. He was going to destroy his reputation. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Laura felt the weight of the paper between her fingers, as if it were made of lead. His eyes ran over the words of the invitation, his breathing ragged, his heart pounding uncontrollably in his chest. The divorce party. Her name stamped next to the justification, printed with refinement, but loaded with contempt. Public humiliation oozed from every lyric, every detail meticulously planned by Ethan to expose her in front of everyone. His stomach dropped. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was a social execution. He didn't just want to leave. He wanted her to pay for every lie, for every stolen touch, for every moment she believed she was in control of the situation. Her eyes went up to him, but the man before her was no longer the husband she once knew. There was a hardness in his gaze, an unshakable conviction. There was no more love there, not even traces of sadness. Just a biting coldness that made her feel smaller by the second. You can't do this, his voice was weak, almost inaudible. Ethan didn't react. He just tilted his head slightly, as if he was waiting for something more, as if he wanted her to plead. You did this to me. His answer came in a calm tone, which made everything even more terrifying. Laura closed her eyes, trying to process. Everything he built, everything he believed to be solid was now crumbling at a speed he couldn't keep up with. She tried to think of a way out, a way to reverse the situation. But there was no room for negotiation. Ethan was no longer the man who would forgive. He was the man who would make sure the world knew exactly who she was. She wanted to run, disappear, stop that event from happening. But how? The damage was already done. His name, his image, his reputation were about to be shattered in front of friends, family and colleagues. She would be the cheating woman, the unfaithful wife, the one who destroyed her own marriage. The weight of what came next suffocated her, but Ethan just remained there, watching her reaction, as if he wanted to absorb every fragment of the pain she now felt. What do you want from me? The question came out between teeth, full of despair. He slid his hands into his pockets, took a deep breath, and shrugged. Nothing. You already gave me everything I needed. The final sentence. There was no way out. She had no control over what was to come. The next few days were a blur. Laura tried to follow her routine, but every step was tormented by the certainty of impending disaster. The invitation began to circulate among close friends, and soon spread like a current that was impossible to contain. The messages started arriving. Some filled with shock, others with contempt. The way colleagues look at work has changed. Silence when I walked into a room was deafening. She tried to contact Ethan numerous times, but each call went to voicemail. He didn't want to hear her justifications, he didn't want her excuses. She no longer had power over him, and that scared her more than anything. The party was approaching. The great spectacle of her undoing was about to unfold. On the day of the event, Laura felt her entire body shake as she saw the posts flood social media. Photos of the luxurious decor, ironic captions, the celebratory atmosphere. Everything planned to turn his betrayal into entertainment. Every click, every share was like a blade piercing your skin. She needed to leave the house, she needed to escape, but she knew that wherever she went, people already knew her story. Ethan, on the other hand, was at the center of it all, relentless. Surrounded by friends, co-workers, family members who hugged him and toasted his rebirth. Each toast was a confirmation that Laura was no longer part of his life. But then, something unexpected happened. In the crowd, someone approached him, a man Ethan recognized immediately. One of the directors of the company where Laura worked. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about all this," he said, squeezing Ethan's hand. "But, personally, I think that all this exposure could end up hurting you more than her." Ethan arched an eyebrow, his posture still firm. "Like this?" The director sighed, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Everyone knows what happened. She has nowhere else to run, she is already paying for her mistake. But exposing her like that, well, that could end up making you the villain of the story." The words hung in the air. For the first time, Ethan felt a hint of doubt creep into his mind. He looked around. The glow of revenge still burned within him, but there was something strange about seeing his pain turned into spectacle. He wanted Laura to suffer, but did he want his story to be remembered only as a man who didn't know how to move on? The thought bothered him. Laura, in her home, stared at her cell phone, her hands shaking. The messages kept coming, some from people she hadn't seen in years. Some malicious, others filled with pity. She hated them all. She didn't want to be seen as the victim of anything. He hated what he did, but he hated the public humiliation even more. But then, the doorbell rang. She hesitated before opening it, expecting anything but what she saw. Ethan, standing there, not saying a word. Surprise took over Laura. He should have been at the party, celebrating his fall. But he was there. She swallowed hard, her eyes red, her voice weak. "What are you doing here?" Ethan watched her for long seconds, as if he was measuring his words. "I thought you wanted to see what you destroyed up close." Her heart jumped in her chest. "I never wanted to destroy anything." He laughed, a humorless laugh, his eyes fixed on hers. "Then why did you do that?" Silence stretched between the two. He expected an answer that might never come. And then, for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel angry. Just tiredness. And it was at that moment that he realized. Revenge was empty. And his true freedom wouldn't come from humiliating her. But to simply leave it behind. Laura remained standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the man who, until recently, was her stronghold. Ethan, however, seemed different. There was no longer hatred burning in his eyes, no longer the uncontrollable fury she had expected. What she saw now was a deep tiredness, an exhaustion that was not just physical, but emotional, as if every piece of him had been ripped away and nothing was left but an emptiness where love once existed. He wasn't there to attack her, nor to seek justifications. He just wanted to see, with his own eyes, what was left of the woman he once loved. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. For a moment, he thought about begging, about saying he would do anything to make things the way they were before, but he knew that was an illusion. There was no going back. Their past had been burned to ashes and now all that was left was the bitter silence of a history beyond repair. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping the apartment where they had lived for years. The sofa where they spent so many nights talking, the framed photos on the shelves, the small details that used to make that place a home. Now, it was just a space filled with ghosts. He took a step inside, closing the door behind him, without haste, without hesitation. "I don't know why I'm here," his voice was low, but filled with something that Laura couldn't immediately identify. She took a step forward, feeling her heart race. I don't know what to say." He let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "You don't need to say anything. Nothing you say now will change what happened. She felt a lump in her throat, but she still tried. I regret it, Ethan. Every day, every minute. He looked up at her, finally truly looking at her, and his expression wasn't anger, but something worse, indifference. Repentance does not change the facts. You had the choice, Laura. And he chose to destroy me. She swallowed hard, trying not to give in to despair. I never wanted to destroy you, but it destroyed it. The silence between them was so heavy that it seemed like its own entity in the room. Laura felt the pain cut through her like a cold blade. She wanted to say that he also had a responsibility, that their marriage was already fragile before everything happened, that she didn't want to have fallen into that trap, but deep down, she knew that everything would sound like an excuse. And excuses weren't what he wanted to hear. Ethan sighed, bringing his hand to his face as if he was trying to collect his thoughts. I spent so much time trying to understand. Trying to find a reason, something that would explain why you did it. I thought that if I knew the reason, maybe I could accept it. But I realized that the reason doesn't matter. The fact is that you chose to break everything we had. And I chose not to carry that weight anymore. She felt panic rise within her. What does that mean? He took a step back, as if creating a definitive distance between them. It means I don't want this war anymore. Revenge didn't give me what I expected. It didn't bring me peace. I thought exposing you, making you feel what I felt, was enough. But it wasn't. Laura felt the air drain from her lungs. So, it's over. Ethan looked at her for long seconds, as if he was recording that image of her in his mind one last time. It ended a long time ago. I just didn't want to accept it. The ground seemed to disappear beneath Laura's feet. She thought she was ready to hear this, but when the words finally came out, when the final sentence was passed, she felt something inside her break. She took a step forward, her eyes watering. Ethan, please don't leave me like this. He didn't back away, but he didn't come any closer either. He just watched her, his expression neutral. I left you a long time ago, Laura. I just hadn't left yet. And then, he turned and walked to the door. Panic took over her. She wanted to run after him, hold him, stop him from leaving, but her legs wouldn't obey. He just stood there, motionless, watching as the man who once was his everything walked away without looking back. The door closed, and the silence in the apartment was deafening. Laura fell to her knees on the floor, tears finally breaking out of control. This was the moment she always dreaded. It wasn't divorce, or even public exposure. What really destroyed her was realizing Ethan was gone. In truth. And I wouldn't go back. Meanwhile, Ethan walked to his car, feeling the cold night wind cut into his skin. But for the first time in a long time, he took a deep breath without feeling the crushing weight on his chest. It was the end. And for the first time, he was ready to move on. Time passed like a whirlwind, dragging with it everything that once seemed unshakable. Ethan no longer carried the weight of betrayal on his shoulders, but the scars remained, invisible to those looking from the outside, but deep to those who felt them. He didn't go back to that house after that night. There was no need. His lawyer took care of everything, and the separation was resolved with the necessary coolness so that the wound would not be reopened. Laura signed the papers without contest. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't beg again. You just signed on and watched your life completely crumble around you. The public exposure was devastating. The divorce party became a talked-about event for much longer than anyone imagined. Friends moved away. Co-workers looked at her with contempt or pity, which was even worse. But the real impact came when the news spread within the company. Her image was tarnished. Not just as a woman, but as a professional. The director who had previously only observed her neutrally now saw her as a problem for the company's reputation. One day, she was called to an unexpected meeting. He listened carefully to the words chosen with the utmost caution, but he knew what they ultimately meant. They could no longer keep someone like her in the position she held. It would be better for everyone if they followed different paths. She left the office carrying her belongings in a box, her eyes fixed on the floor, listening to the whispers that surrounded her. She felt like a ghost of herself. The confident woman, who walked the corridors with her head held high, no longer existed. She lost her job, lost her husband, lost everything that was once her safe haven. The lover? That was the first to disappear. There was no longer the mystery, the excitement of the forbidden. Just the weight of reality, and he wasn't willing to carry that. With no job, no friends, no one to hold her hand, she found herself alone for the first time in a long time. Meanwhile, Ethan rebuilt his life without looking back. In the beginning, there was emptiness. The silence of nights without someone by her side, the lack of routine, of habits that, however painful they were now, had been part of her life for years. But what was once a dark hole began to be filled with new possibilities. He refocused on work, traveled, met people, allowed himself to live without carrying the shadow of what Laura had done. And then, he met someone. It wasn't a planned meeting, it wasn't a romance built to erase the pain of the past. It was something that happened naturally, when I least expected it. That time, he didn't jump in head first. He learned to be cautious. But little by little, he realized he could trust again. That could allow herself to feel without fear. Little by little, he rediscovered what it meant to be truly happy, without secrets, without suspicion, without the weight of an unresolved story. Laura, on the other hand, sank into regret. He tried to start over, but every door he knocked closed before it could even be opened. Every attempt to move forward was suffocated in the wake of his betrayal. Time didn't heal her, it just made her more aware of what she lost. And then, the news came. Ethan was engaged. Laura read that on her cell phone screen, feeling the world spin. The photos were there, spread across social media. He was smiling, genuinely happy, hugging a woman who seemed to light up everything around her. She couldn't help but feel bitterly that this smile would never be for her again. It would never be for her again. He had forgotten her. And it hurt more than any punishment he had ever received. Time is unforgiving. Time doesn't come back. Ethan moved on with his life and built something new. Laura was left behind, trapped in the choice she made, in the mistakes she made. And so, their story came to an end. Now, I want to know your opinion. What did you think of this story? Do you believe Laura deserved everything that happened? Or do you think Ethan's revenge went too far? Leave your comment and share your vision. And if you're not yet a subscriber, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Here, we never romanticize betrayal. What we do is show its consequences and how it can destroy lives. Until next time.